A little bit earlier, I teased the fact that Gallup has released for 2025 a continuing survey that shows that ever since 2020 was the last time in that survey that worldwide employee engagement went up. And then we began that trend of quiet quitting. And even though we're no longer calling it quiet quitting or whatever the other fad names are, employee engagement continues to decline. That's a problem when we're trying to solve tomorrow's problem with a curiosity for the unknown. Welcome to The Maintenance Mindset, an audio video podcast brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network. I'm your host, Paul Rhodes, and over the more than 3 decades in the apartment industry, I've had roles that include being on site, providing services as a vendor, creating and delivering multiple education programs, and active association work. This podcast is centered on the often overlooked role that our on-site maintenance workers play. You know, the men and women that respond in the middle of the night to the toilet call, or the after hours, it's really hot in my apartment request, or my favorite, my ring fell down the drain, get over here now. In other words, the often unsung heroes who are responsible for asset preservation and resident satisfaction. Working in multifamily maintenance provides interesting, sometimes amusing, and often fascinating stories and viewpoints. My encouragement to you is this: whatever you do it with a maintenance mindset. Hey there. We're on part number 2 of a topic that I'm calling curiosity and maintenance. So if you didn't happen to catch last week's episode, I would encourage you to go back, because I firmly believe that in order to be good, well above average maintenance technicians, we have to be curious. Even if you're not a maintenance technician and you happen to be listening, I believe that in order to be good, well above average in property management, we have to be curious. But it can't just be regular old, gee, I wonder what that is. I'm talking about courageous curiosity. We discussed the first episode that we can't rely on yesterday's solutions for tomorrow's problems, because if for no other reason, entropy. We also discussed checklists, why I have a love-hate relationship with them. This episode, we're going to talk about a framework for us as employees. And I firmly believe this is even if you're a CEO or a leader of an organization, because you will report to someone, whether it's your customers, your investors, whoever it is, we all report to someone. That means we are employees. So as an employee, courageous curiosity, to me, has 4 E's in it. Courageous curiosity. Why did I come up with that alliteration? I'm having a hard time saying it, and it's mine. To do those 2 C's. Courageous curiosity. In order for that to happen, we have to have 4 E's. The first is known expectations. The second is acknowledged empowerment. The third is correct equipment. And the fourth is residual engagement. Now, all 4 of those, the second word starts with E. And what I want to do today is to look at curiosity and how using the 4 E's takes us beyond just the, well, I wonder what that is over there, and we don't worry about it anymore. I mean, technically that is curiosity. You notice something somewhere else that's not the norm. Using the 4 E's as a framework gives us the ability to begin getting beyond a checklist. See, the very first part of courageous curiosity is that we're dealing with a known expectation. If we have a building that we are familiar with, that we know what's supposed to happen, we know that on this floor of a high rise, every floor, the closet is right there. That's where the electrical room is. That's where the storage room is. That's where whatever is. It's the same way that is known. You expect that to be there. If you're dealing with a garden style community, you know you would expect for the main power to be on one side or the other of the building. That is a known expectation of the physical asset. For our residents, we know we can make some expectations based on our resident demographic, based on where the location of our properties are, what the demographic is of the city that we are in. Those are known expectations. As employees, we, chances are, have goals or KPIs. These are expected behaviors that we use to meet a certain level. And as we discussed prior, if that certain level is not constructed in a way that deals with tomorrow's problems, then very quickly we're going to be having a goal that moves towards yesterday's challenges. And once we solve yesterday's challenges, well, then we're doing great for yesterday, but tomorrow's a coming. So you see, if we look at known expectations from the frame of our asset, a question to ask for courageous curiosity, the question to ask our building is, do I know when to relax and when to get concerned? Stuff happens in our buildings, on our properties all the time. A pothole, for instance. I mean, our sidewalks, our driveways, the asphalt is going to deteriorate. If you see a little crack, do I need to get involved or do I need to let it ride? The answer is it depends. But the known expectation is what is expected of me as an employee. The courageous curiosity part is asking that question until we get an answer. If you're the maintenance supervisor of a property and you see a crack beginning to form on your property, bring it up to your property manager, bring it up to capital management, bring it up to your owner, whatever your organization is, and ask, is this crack something I need to be concerned with? If the answer is no, a lot of times it will be no, then fine. I've noted it, and maybe 6, 9, 12 months from now, maybe after the next freeze thaw cycle, I take another look at it and I'll ask that question again. That's the courageous part. I don't let it drop. But that's what courageous curiosity looks like for my building, for my property. What about for a resident? This one can be a little bit tougher. If I'm being curious for the frame of a resident on whether or not I am doing a good job above average, then the question I want to ask is, what does it look like when I am doing what we would classify as a good job? I'll ask the people that I report to, what does it look like when I'm doing a good job? That is the known expectation that as an employee, I need to hit for the frame of my resident. Because in my resident's eyes, chances are that's going to be a different view at being a good job than what I would think. Often that frame is one of time. How quickly am I solving the issue that they brought up to me? Or am I performing in a way that I even prevent my resident from having to bring whatever issue to my attention. That's curb appeal. Picking up the trash, cleaning up the entrance, making sure that the irrigation is working, all of those things, my resident just expects them. Do I have the same level of expectation in my performance as what my resident does? That's why the first E is known expectation. And if I don't know, then I need to ask. That's an example of courageous curiosity. Now, the second E of this framework is acknowledged empowerment. That means if I know what is expected of me for managing, maintaining my building, if I know what is expected of me for managing and maintaining my resident, then am I empowered to do so? In other words, it would be a part of saying, I know which decisions I can make without having to ask permission. In other words, if I see that crack in the asphalt, am I empowered to seal it? If I'm supposed to do something with it, can I do that? Because sealing that crack in the asphalt, depending on how big it is, it could have a large impact, depending on where it is. I mean, if it's in the entrance, I've got to cone off and block off the entrance in order for me to seal that crack, because I don't want any of the sealer to get on my residents' cars. And that means, at least for some time, I'm going to have to block off the roadway. Am I empowered to block off the roadway? Now, questions to ask to check if I have acknowledged empowerment. The question to be courageously curious is, for the frame of my property, are the parts for repairs always in stock, or do I have to continually ask for them? And we're talking here about predicted repairs. Case in point, if we already know how many apartments are going to move out next month, I mean, we could make a pretty good swag, scientific, wild, assumed guess. Scientific part, because it's math involved. What I mean by that is, every month, 60 days out, we know how many leases are coming due, how many leases will terminate, and we have to renew. Generally speaking, 60 days out, that's when we get the notice to vacate, right? Well, if 2 months from today, I have, just for round numbers, I have 20 apartments that are on notice to vacate, and right now, my property is having roughly a 50% renewal rate. 20 apartments, 50% of them are expected to renew. That means 10 additional apartments are going to come vacant 60 days from today. If I have electric stoves, old style with the burners, that means I need drip pans. Well, how many drip pans do I need to have in stock 2 months from now? Each stove has 4 drip pans, 10 apartments. I need 40 drip pans, because each stove has 2 8-inch and 2 6-inch drip pans. That means I need 20 drip pans that are 8-inch, 20 drip pans that are 6-inch. We know that 2 months beforehand. So here's my question. This is where the curiosity part comes into play. If we already know today that tomorrow, 2 months from now, I'm going to need 20 6-inch drip pans and 20 8-inch drip pans. If I know that today, do I have a plan to have them in stock when I need them? Or do I have to go to my property manager and say, please, oh, Mr. or Mrs. Property Manager, may I please have the required parts to do the job that you have entrusted me with? If I have to go ask every single month for that example, you, leader, have not empowered me, employee, to meet the known expectation. This is why for our properties, curiosity needs to be met regularly. If we're looking for engagement, which is number 4, if we want to get that from our residents, and according to Gallup right now, engagement is an all-time low for employees. If we want our employee engagement to go up, we need to make sure that they have what they need to do what we're expecting of them. Now, from a resident standpoint, if I am curious about looking at things from my resident's point of view, do I tell stories about my residents using should, or do I tell stories about my residents using will or did? Meaning, when my resident moves in, they should be happy with the apartment that they're moving into. Or do I tell stories when my employee moves or when my resident moves in, they will be happy about the apartment that they're moving into? Notice the difference there. If you're telling stories about your resident in this example and you're using the word should, chances are you are not empowered to deliver what your resident is expecting, or you don't know what your resident is expecting. Go back to the first part of the framework. The third piece of this framework on courageous curiosity, remember, we started with a known expectation. We now have an acknowledged empowerment. The third part of this framework is correct equipment. Now, this is different than the parts that we talked about in the first one. If I am doing a good job as an employee, then I have what is required to do the known expectation, and I'm empowered to do it. I have what is needed. We're speaking here of tools, time, equipment to do it above just making do. In other words, for your make readies, are your maintenance people just making do with what they have? Are they using and continuously scraping the bottom of the barrel for their tools? Do they use tools for things that they weren't intended for just to get the job done? Are they band-aiding things? If I am courageously curious about the type of work that I am doing, I will ask people who I report to about my property, what needs to occur so that we stop band-aiding repairs? I know. Chances are you know what I mean by band-aiding repairs. You know, when you get called out for that 2 o'clock in the morning water heater call, electric water heater, and you get there, your resident has called because the water heater is cold, and you go out in the middle of the night, you go and you push the reset button on that top thermostat. It kicks on, you hear the little hiss of the heating elements start to heat up. You put the cover back on and you go, because you know within 20, 25 minutes, the water inside that water heater is going to be hot. That is an example of a Band-Aid repair. Why is it a Band-Aid repair? Because chances are, if it trips once and all we did was solve the problem, it's going to trip again. We might as well, it would be better if we took the time and solved it right then and there. The problem is, and this is where that equipping comes into play. If I'm the property leader, have I gotten across the message to my maintenance technician that speed is important, beyond a Band-Aid is more important? In other words, quite frequently as leaders, we're telling our maintenance teams, no overtime, zero overtime. You're not allowed to get overtime, but respond to an emergency. Those two items, we will respond to the emergency, but because my boss, my leader, my manager said no overtime, I'm going to get this done as absolutely fast as possible. That means for electric water heater, pull the cover off, push the reset button, put it back on. How many of us working on properties with electric water heaters have noticed when you go back through reporting that the same apartment had somebody report after hours for the no hot water call 2, 3, 4, even 5 times? Just because different people on call, it happens, it repeats, we're not paying attention to what we're called back for. And whatever system we're using, which unfortunately is very frequent with a lot of the proper tech work order programs, management systems that we do, they don't remind us in the moment that we're there for the same issue that was reported before. In other words, it doesn't actively tell us of go backs. If you're listening to this and you're a part of a situation like that, that would be my solution, my biggest desire. That's also a part of equipping us to do something just above the level of a Band-Aid. Now, if I'm being curious for a resident, the question I would ask, if I'm courageous, the question I would ask for my resident is, what can I point to that I did which decreased future work? Or even, what, as an employee, can I point to that is something that my resident didn't even have to worry about because I solved it? That is being equipped to do good, above average. So, 3 parts of our framework that we've gotten through so far. Do I have known expectations? Am I empowered to do that? And you know I'm empowered to do, and I am known that I'm empowered to do, so it's acknowledged. The third is, do I have the correct equipment? And that could be the right tool. It also could be time, without guilt of having to be worried about, oh, if I fix this correctly, am I going to get yelled at? The fourth piece is residual engagement. Now, a little bit earlier, I teased the fact that Gallup has released for 2025 the continuing survey that shows that ever since 2020 was the last time in that survey that worldwide employee engagement went up. And then we began that trend of quiet quitting. And even though we're no longer calling it quiet quitting or whatever the other fad names are, employee engagement continues to decline. That's a problem when we're trying to solve tomorrow's problem with a curiosity for the unknown. If we're not engaged as employees and continuously engaged as employees, then we are going to only rely on yesterday's problems or yesterday's solutions to solve tomorrow's problems. So, how, as a courageously curious person, do I look for residual engagement? How can I stay interested in whatever problem I'm trying to solve, whether it is my property or a problem that my resident has? How do I stay engaged? What I think this means is that even if I solve the problem that I'm empowered to, I meet the expectation with the equipment that was required, am I looking for another challenge, or do I just leave and ignore whatever's happening? Even after the current questions are answered, am I looking for a new question, or am I rushing to try and catch up with other needs? See, If we're talking about our property, I'm an advocate for maintenance teams, for property leaders to begin asking questions of your equipment. What is this? How does it work? I'm often asked, how did you get started going into education for multifamily? And my answer is part joke, but it's part reality. I got into education within the multifamily industry specifically because I don't handle boredom well. Meaning, when I was on site, if I ever got to the point of being bored, I'll go break something to figure out how it works. That curiosity is what I mean by asking questions of our property. How does this work? Why does this happen? What does it look like if it happens in a way that is better? Asking those questions. Why does this door constantly swing open? What does it look like if the door didn't swing open? How could I prevent that? These are questions we need to be asking. If we're courageously curious about our properties, these are questions we need to be asking about them. What about residents? Ooh, if I'm curious about my resident, that's where it really gets fun. Take a moment and ask your resident directly the questions. You know, Mary Gwynn, the another podcast host, she's the host of PX Multifamily, the people experience. And she and I years ago, we did this session on employee turnover. And her organization does this really cool thing when they hire somebody. I think I've talked about it before here. If not, I've talked about it on camera. And really, it doesn't matter because Mary, I still to this day, it's amazing to me just how easy it is. When a new employee starts, she has a sheet that she directly asks their new employee, what do you like to be rewarded with? In other words, how do you like to be acknowledged for doing a good job? And it's got suggestions on there, like there's gift cards for coffee. There's what is your favorite restaurant? What little cakes and candies and seemingly frivolous things do you like? What extracurricular activities? Do you like reading? Do you like movies? Do you like taking your spouse out for a date? Do you like the racetrack? All of these things, she just comes right out and asks. That is such a mind-blowingly simple thing to do, and yet a lot of our organizations don't even take that first step. What if we took it one more step? What about our residents? Hey, resident, is this done to what you were expecting? Oftentimes, if we just pay attention to their body language, to how their tone of voice, to what they're talking about, we may discover what they think about what we did. What can I demonstrate to you that would help you, Mr. or Mrs. Resident, understand how this works? This one, case in point, if you've got an apartment that has 2 bathrooms, one of them has the GFCI buttons in it, and the other bathroom has just a regular receptacle. Is there more that can be done when we go in there and we just push the button in that bathroom and now this receptacle works? What if we took a moment to demonstrate to our residents that that works in there for a very good reason? It's easier to wire. It also costs less. And as a management company, if we do things that cost less, Mr. and Mrs. Resident, it's in your benefit. This engagement, this interaction with our residents gives them the ability to be engaged. Our responsibility, if we're curious, is to begin asking our residents questions about that exact thing. So, the 4E framework for us to be courageously curious is: have a known expectation, acknowledge that you are empowered to do something, and that implies that you just do it. You don't ask for permission. You don't ask, Mother, may I? And if you do need to ask permission for whatever it is, you're not empowered to do it. The third piece is correct equipment. Be sure that you have all the tools, both physical and don't forget about that all important tool of time. And the last piece of this 4E framework is a residual engagement, meaning continue to ask questions even after the problem was solved. That's how we can begin to use curiosity to solve tomorrow's problems with new solutions instead of trying to use yesterday's solutions to solve tomorrow's problems, because tomorrow's problems are coming. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll see you somewhere. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Maintenance Mindset. I hope you take away ideas that apply to your current and future career goals. Please check out Maintenance Mindset Minute to hear short-form, high-impact, applicable, maintenance-centered information. Whatever you do today, do it with a maintenance mindset. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. Visit multifamilymedianetwork.com to learn more about our other industry podcasts, thought pieces, and sponsorship opportunities. I'll see you somewhere.